What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? My coworker likes to initiate conversations, then does long pauses, where you go to say something back, then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in, ends up riddled with spelling mistakes, while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. Worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay on the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words, sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. Every time I think I'm a F***CKUP I read stories like this, and I feel better about myself instantly. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my third day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. I was a research assistant at a mortgage firm. Whoa. Had this same situation. We had a full maintenance crew, but my department had previously helped with parking lot trash until our hours were cut, which was discussed and mandated from corporate. The top guy for our location came in extra early, picked up the parking lot trash, and dumped it on my desk. Then he berated all of the managers in front of everyone for my department. Just the tip of the iceberg when it came that asshole, though. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way, and not to ask questions, because I should already know what to do. I had just gotten the position. My wife talked about a supervisor her first husband had. When he, the husband, had an idea about improving their methods, the supervisor, who had a really strong Chicago accent, think of Saturday Night Live, Da Bears would say you don't think, I think, and you do. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall, gossip, then call those people in, to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for shit she did wrong. She was so arrogant, and she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. F***CK Walmart and F***CK that B***TCH for almost getting me arrested. No contest. It was the literal crackhead I worked with for 4 months that was also secretly living in the office and being completely nonsensical when he was actually working. We found a mattress folded up in the warehouse after he was let go and an actual brand new crack pipe with a price tag on it to boot squirreled away back there. He and his family, not just him living in the office, left discarded food everywhere like pizza crusts in the toilet brush holder in the bathroom. What even? And they left hair in the sink in the bathroom as they were obviously bathing in there too, as we had no actual bathing facilities in the office. One day during his tenure, he sent an email saying his alarm didn't go off and he'd be in at X time, which kept getting moved back later and later. He eventually showed up at 4:40 PM and we closed at 5 PM. Lol. See comment above about secretly living in the office. There's so much more I could go into. It was a wild 4 months, that's for sure. His girlfriend was always around at work and she would move in a way that you would absolutely never see her face. We thought maybe she had a warrant out for her arrest or something. I think only one of us saw her actual face and she would also sit behind the warehouse bay door in their Nissan Altima with it running all day for the account when she wasn't back there with him. He wanted us to hire her to help him, which wasn't happening. Our warehouse area was concrete flooring which didn't get cleaned often at all, and she'd walk around back there barefoot. As mentioned before, he was completely nonsensical at work as well. He suggested to my coworker, who scans our old documents to PDF via a feeder on our copier, of course, that she should take a picture of each page with her cell phone and do it that way. I got multiple emails from him that made no sense at all, and I eventually had to just forward some to my boss so he could see what was going on. It was a sad situation, but also a WTF situation for the rest of us. He brought his GF to the interview and asked if she could sit in on it because it was so hot outside. Now, if we didn't have a Walmart and a huge shopping center within spitting distance, that might have made sense, but that was pretty unprofessional, and they still hired him. All we did was lose money by employing him. He worked on one pro bono job we did and managed to *CK that up. This was at an engineering firm, by the way. Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips as food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales, and the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized. Said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking, or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or two, and we had no idea who was responsible. My coworkers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Channel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She'd left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the Channel Bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5 shits a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back, and triumphantly announce that's shit number 3. *CKING Daniel. Let a man announce his shits. 5 shits a day keep the doctor away. I worked in a certain touring exhibition last summer. It's not Potter, FYI, and of 200 people who were applying for jobs, 20 of us got the job. We were all close-knit and had a love for the exhibit content, and being all genuinely interesting people made us a family. Bar one woman. She thought she was the world's biggest star for having a 3-second cameo on GOT, and sent harassing messages and calls to many of us. She sexually harassed a lovely guy on the shop team who had no interest, undermined the bosses constantly, talked back, was rude to customers. When she thought we talked about her behind her back, she got defensive and spiteful. We didn't. One day she got knocked back for good by the shop guy, and for some reason decided to take it out on me. Started slabbering about me around to every other coworker, but never to my face. She called me a white snake. Now, I'm albino and my hair color got me seriously bullied in school along the vein of her insults, so her name calling was very hurtful. I had enough and took it 2 hours, and she was fired for her actions. I could go on, but she doesn't deserve any more thought. I worked with a guy who'd interrupt any conversation to talk about anything, as if he was the expert. And I don't use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about anything, including things he had never heard of or obviously didn't know much about. When the subject being discussed was something in the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original discussion to something he would like to talk about at the moment. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% of him just talking non-stop. Everybody else was way too polite and against conflict to say anything, including me, so most people just tried to stay away from him, but he'd follow people around. I eventually left, but I even remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working at a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King, but without the lettuce, because that's rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day and was confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently if he ate corn he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He would tell me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time, along with many other theories that came from his gut. One day we got into a political argument before the 2016 election where he said, if Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war and I will not hesitate to kill you and your family. Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. My old supervisor. She was that special brand of too nice. Laughing was her nervous tick and hoo boy it was constant. She was incapable of being assertive, which is not the best quality for someone whose job is telling other people what to do. The best she could do was be passive aggressively nice when she really needed something done, which just made everyone dislike her. One of my favorite things about being in the military was that your pre-military status did not matter. Everyone wears the same uniform and you'd never know if your favorite military leader came from privilege or squalor. The uniform, for all of its drawbacks, is an objectively effective unifier. It levels the playing field. Looking the same as everyone else challenged me to ensure that my work ethic and ideas created opportunities, not some predetermined status. I had a peer who was better than all of that. He didn't do the work unless it interested him. We didn't do interesting things and constantly complained that our work was below him. On more than one occasion, he tried to pay for others to do his work for him. His entire point of being in the military was to prove to his father that he could earn something, and sought to accomplish that by claiming he'd already earned it. F***ck that guy. Back when I worked at a restaurant, I was friends with the bartender, Chill Jude, right up until they made him manager, and that small amount of power and increase in pressure made him so angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was shit at my job because I didn't do a thing that I've never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus so I couldn't get home. It was pitch black outside and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst co-worker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a shit worker. He was just stressed and didn't know how to handle it, I suppose. He was a complete utter moron. He was incompetent in every way, but the icing on the cake was when he tried to put one of the pickup trucks into gear with the wiper stick and called me an idiot when I told him it was the wrong lever. Did you say wrong lever, crank? He just wouldn't work. Just wouldn't. This was in a research lab. He was a visiting researcher from another country and he spent a lot of time asking tons of non-work related questions to the point of disrupting others' work. In the course of a year, he designed one very basic experiment and didn't actually do it. Just designed it. He was above doing bench work apparently. He picked fights with everyone doing any experiment related to the one he was planning because he didn't want to have to share credit for anyone. He wouldn't clean up after himself, wouldn't pick up things from the floor. He actually called me in from another room because he wouldn't take a stringless tea bag out of his mug. Also on a different occasion, because he'd knocked some things off a hanger on the back of the door and for whatever reason wouldn't pick them up. It was kind of like working with a child. He must have had servants where he lived. I don't know how, but he was there for his PhD. Boss fired him. He was one of 2 people in her 30+ year career that she'd ever fired. I worked at a grocery store, and one of the scheduling ladies was a total C-bomb. When you work at a grocery store you expect to have shifts all over the place. That's part of the job, so I'm not complaining about that. Just about 2 years into working there I had an accident and broke my thumb/hand. Not while at work unfortunately lol, and needed surgery. I went to apply for employment insurance, EI, and they required a record of employment, RO. So I asked the woman in charge of that, the aforementioned scheduling lady, if she would mind sending that off so I could still pay rent while I was off work recovering. BTW, she told me she already had. So I go back to the EI offices and they told me they still had no row. So I go back to my old work and ask her a second time. This happens until I asked her to do it 4 times. This resulted in me having to borrow money from my parents for Christmas in order to pay my rent. At my first job, vet assistant at a small animal clinic, there was this middle-aged woman. She primarily worked as the receptionist, who was constantly snarky and rude towards me and my work. After sharing with another coworker that I was planning to go to school to become a vet, she, the receptionist, laughed at me and said, "I don't think I could see you as a vet." I was only 16 years old, mind you. I had big dreams and goals, and I was taking solid steps towards achieving them. I remember standing there, taken aback, and honestly holding back tears or any indication that I was upset. I was accepted to vet school at age 18, and I'm still in school actively pursuing that dream. Guess I'm gonna prove her wrong. The CEO's girlfriend was a devout vegan who would patrol the office around lunch to make sure that anyone who was eating meat promised not to use the sponge in the kitchen to wash anything that meat had touched. She did this in yoga pants and heels, but because her personality sucked, she wasn't remotely attractive. For April Fool's Day, I rinsed out a carton of chicken broth and filled it with mango juice and made a point of pouring myself a glass and drinking it in front of her. She was disgusted, so it was twice as delicious. Fast food. Third shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. How TF do you afford coke on a fast food paycheck? I worked in childcare, and they had hired a new assistant/trainee teacher for my room. Each room has 2 teachers. She just constantly argued about the dumbest shit and always tried to argue with me about both company and state childcare policies because that's dumb. Also was late every day her first week there. It all just started adding up until I was changing diapers and she was holding a 2-year-old child on her lap. I see a child biting another child and say, "You need to go help them," as I have a child in the middle of a very explosive poopy diaper change up on the changing table and can't leave him there obviously. She doesn't get up. I repeat it and she says, "Well, I have this kid on my lap." So I say, "Take him off your lap." She responds, "He's strong." Like this grown ass adult is unable to move a 2-year-old off her lap because of some weird super strength. Then the child bites the other child again, and at that point I'm mad and tell her to get up and help them now. She then proceeds to say, "So what? I have to watch these 4 kids while you just have one up on the table." Like I'm somehow supposed to have multiple children on the table at once to make her job of sitting on the floor making sure kids don't get bit twice in a row easier, and our ratios were 4:1 anyways. I finished my diaper change, stuck my head out the door to my supervisor and told her, "Get this lady out of my room," and they did after, and wrote her up after reviewing the footage of the incident. She was fired for no call no showing the next week. I've worked with a lot of idiots in childcare, but she was so shitty in such a short amount of time. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. The pay you complete shit and work you so hard it tears you body and mind up. I just graduated high school and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy I work with, we nicknamed Big Matt since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked, but this 35-year-old lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking and her being raped, and ever since then he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse. He just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a fucking idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 coworkers didn't show up, so I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. Next day one of the coworkers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an O of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. So before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6 foot some odd inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch of life for calling the cops on him. Next day I looked him up, and sure enough he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst coworker out of all the ones I faced.